I opened my eyes and I was in some desert, like sand dunes, and the dunes were blue, like bluish green. So I knew, I'm definitely not on Earth right now.
Right.
And I turn over to the left, and there is this the first time I've ever seen something that wasn't human. And he had these lines on his face and this glowing energy light that was emanating through the lines on all over his face, all over his arm, and he was wearing this hooded robe. And we communicated telepathically. And I looked at him and he said, "Oh, interesting to see you here." Then I was like, "Yeah, I'm surprised to be here." And he's like, "Go back to your world." Boom, I woke up in my body, just like that.
Welcome to another episode of Awaken Now What. I'm your host, JR.
And I'm your host, Helen.
Awaken Now What is a podcast that illuminates your spiritual awakening and ascension. All right, today we're going to be talking about the out-of-body experience. And to help us with this conversation, let's welcome back Ryan J. Burton. Welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, another returning guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, guys.
Absolutely. What would you define the out-of-body experience to be, just for the listeners who don't know or aren't familiar with that term?
Yeah, so the more common term, or I guess the term that would be more familiar, would be astral projection. So
Right. Okay.
When people hear astral projection, that makes more sense. But out-of-body experience refers to any experience in consciousness that is outside the domain of being physically embodied. So a person who's having an experience on plant medicine, for example, and their consciousness shifts outside of their physical body or to some other reality, that would be considered an out-of-body experience. Astral projection is specifically referring to the astral body. So you have many bodies. You have one physical body, but you also have subtle bodies or non-physical bodies. And the astral body is one of those. So when you transfer consciousness into the astral body, and then the astral body has the experience of leaving the physical body, that's what we refer to as astral projection. So if you were to have an experience where you separated from your physical body and you're like floating now in the corner of the room and you're looking at yourself sleeping in the bed, that's a classic astral projection. And most near-death experiences are classified as out-of-body experiences. They have the sense of floating out of their body into some light or into a tunnel. These are all classic examples of out-of-body experience.
I've only triggered OBEs through the use of psychedelics. Mm-hmm. Helen has an amazing experience with an OBE using 5-MeO-DMT.
Right.
Helen, do you want to?
I was thinking to ask if ego death is an OBE, but like when you were saying that if you know you're formless, like it's so different because like there's no body, right? So that like when I smoked 5-MeO, that was more like it was like complete formlessness. So I don't know that that's technically an OBE, right? If you're doing an umbrella, it is. Yeah. Okay.
They're called formless OBE.
Formless. Okay, there we go. Yeah. I mean that experience is so So first it was like I had to do a purge because I was told that when I smoked it, I screamed and looked like I was sneezing. So that was a big purge. I mean, as an empath, I think that there's a lot go out of me.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, being in the formlessness, I think that's just what I take with me every day to be able to access so much love and compassion because I know what we all really are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob Monroe said, is one of his famous lines as part of the gateway affirmation is, I am more than my physical body. And so he asked, when he was alive and in the Journeys trilogy, the question was, how much more are we than physical? So you definitely uh, know what he's referring to. From the,
Yeah. And that speaks to like when we're awakened, we recognize that what we're doing more so is like remembering, right? It's not really about like it's an interesting awakening and remembering words. Like they start to get intertangled.
yeah, they're the same. You can say from an angle they're the same thing. Like as you're awakening is actually remembering. I have a specific OBE about that you would probably be interested.
Let's hear it. Share,
Yeah.
please share.
Yeah, so to start with the OBEs, I started with lucid dreaming when I was 17. Yeah, 16 going on 17. And lucid dreaming came pretty easily. But the full like out of body experience with there's this classic thing that people describe called the vibrational state. So this is when your consciousness is transferring to the astral body and it's about to exit the physical body. And this vibrational state is like, for some people, it's the first major like spiritual test where you're confronted with very intense stuff that is super visceral and actually happening. So for me, I was laying there in bed just doing energy work and getting ready to attempt an exit. And as soon as my body fell asleep, like my entire body started vibrating. It was suddenly as if I was thrown into a jet engine. So loud, just roaring sounds. I was hearing all of these, it's like thousands and thousands of voices and whispers, and it was totally terrifying. I mean, there was nothing I'd ever experienced that was that scary up to that point because it was so just in your face. And when a lot of people have their first OBE, they describe a shadow, or is commonly referred to as a sleep paralysis demon. so,
Right.
so I experienced this. Like when I passed the whole like jet engine sounds and the whispers of the underworld, all this stuff, my astral vision turns on and I could see the whole room with my eyes closed. And there was a shadow in the corner of the room. And I just thought, and my fear came up because what is still present in the initial OBEs is the like the biological or the physiological responses to, it's the same feeling as if like a bear just came into your backyard and is now within walking distance of you, right? So you're laying there, I'm laying there, and there's this shadow visibly standing in the corner of my room. The fear comes up, so much fear, and with the intensity of the fear, it gets closer. So I scream so loud, I pass out. I just, and the experience stops, and I wake up, and the whole thing was shut down. It was over, and I went to my friends at school, and I told them what happened, and they said, "Oh, dude, that's the sleep paralysis demon. Like, don't mess with the stuff that you're doing. It's not good." And fortunately, I listened to an interview with Robert Bruce. He's the author of Astral Dynamics, a popular book at the time, and he said that the sleep paralysis demon or shadow is a test from the higher self. It's not actually real. And I thought, that's interesting. And then the interviewer pushed him on it, and he just said, "Yeah, if you don't believe me, do it yourself. Complete the exit, and you'll find that the shadow disappears. It's not real." And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot one more time," which is wild that being so terrified I would even try. But I was so interested by this experience. I wanted to know more. So did the same thing, did the energy work, started the separation. The shadow appeared after the vibrational state and the astral vision turned on. And I noticed that if I was able to keep my fear in check, it wouldn't move closer. So as soon as I calmed down, it stopped moving closer. So I
That is
thought,
so insane.
wow. So I completed the exit with a rope technique. So once you pass the vibrational state, you can feel that you're pulling on a rope, and this will actually pop the astral body out, and you might spin out or just
Yeah.
phase out. So I spun out, and the whole room was illuminated. The shadow was gone. I was looking at myself in the bed, and that was the day I entered, the spirit world and really began to explore all of this. So fast forward like 7 years later, because a lot of your initial OBEs, I mean, it depends on the person, but my initial OBEs were like, I couldn't get through the ceiling. I'm in my backyard. I'm falling on the floor. Can't fly. So there was like a learning curve, at least for me. Maybe with how the vibrational field of the earth is now and the changes in consciousness that have happened, people may not have the same kind of trial period that I did. Maybe people that are OBEing now, they're just like automatically doing wild stuff. But at the time, I didn't have, it was like baby steps. So I'm just going to skip all of the stuff that wasn't interesting and get to the interesting stuff.
Juicy
Yeah,
stuff.
at the 7 year mark. So by year 7 or so, I was already now in contact with a non-physical guide. I think it'd be described best as probably a jinn, like a genie. But when I encountered
Mm.
this being, it was the reason I classify him or it as a jinn is because of the like the physical being or the physical person is made of bones and blood, and this being was made of some kind of cosmic fire that he had a cosmic fire as a cerebral cortex as opposed to a blood brain
Interesting.
or flesh brain,
Right.
and blue colored skin, wore a robe. And the first time the first time I actually encountered it or him, uh, I had a name that came to me in meditation that was in Arabic. First of all, I don't know a thing about Arabic. So an Arabic name comes to me in meditation. And a couple of weeks later, I ended up having an OBE, and I just said the name. And the ceiling disappeared, and I was brought through this portal. It's kind of like hyperspace, like in Star Wars, like all the lights passing by you. And then I opened my eyes, and I was in some desert, like sand dunes, and the dunes were blue, like bluish green. So I knew,
On another
oh,
planet.
I'm definitely not on Earth right now.
Right.
And I turn over to the left, and there is this the first time I've ever seen something that wasn't human. And he had these lines on his face and this glowing energy light that was emanating through the lines on all over his face, all over his arm, and he was wearing this hooded robe. And we communicated telepathically. And I looked at him, and he said, "Oh, interesting to see you here." Then I was like, "Yeah, I'm surprised to be here." And
Wow.
he's like, "Go back to your world." Boom! I woke up in my body, just like that. Like it was that fast. He sent me back in a split second.
That's interesting.
The first contact with a non physical guide or teacher. He brought me through different astral journeys or different OBEs where certain lessons were uh, revealed or certain insights were given to me. One of them was, and this was related to the phrase that we often hear about remembering things. So
Mhm.
like awakening is just remembering
Right.
what we already know. So that could be, for example, some things that you've done in past lives. You're reconnecting with that, or you're rediscovering that. That's generally the angle that people take on that. What I discovered was a bit different. So I had an OBE, and I appeared in a kind of. I mean, this was a pretty far reality. I remember going through like hyperspace sort of thing, and then also a few different kinds of portals. But when I finally appeared there, the body, or the non-physical body that I had in that reality or in that dimension, it had capacities that the human body and even the astral body does not have. So as I was appearing in this place, in this particular dimension or reality, everything about that planet and everything about the beings that live there was downloaded into my mind in a successive series of images. So like imagine the way that the human body or human brain works is we process like one thought at a time.
Right. Linear.
Like a story comes up. So imagine a compression of thousands of frames in 1 second. So it's like super downloading information, super speed downloading of information about the planet, the technology, the people,
Wow.
Wow.
their level of consciousness, different scenes from the world, all of this. And I remember as I was arising there, I had an impossible thought, which was, I'm tired of having to come back
Huh.
to this place. I've never been to that place.
Huh.
So I've never been there. I've never been there. I couldn't think that.
Right.
But this particular version of myself has been there. So when I finally appeared, I was actually hugging, his name is Zahir, the non-physical friend. I was hugging him, and there were 5 other blue guys in purple robes around him, and then there were, 6 of them floating in the air. And their form of consciousness is very different than human. Humans generally are still in survival consciousness, but these beings operate in a kind of love consciousness, and they're definitely outside of. They just perceive reality very differently. Like the same way that we can pick up a diamond and examine its facets, like they could pick up a moment in time. They could pick up time and look at it that same way. So it's very different, and they're all telepathic. So what they showed me on the second journey to that reality or planet was a training center. So we were in a room, a facility, and it has it had spaceship vibes, like the walls were white and everything. And the humans in there were all wearing skin tight black clothing, like Star Trek in a way. And they were practicing healing. Some of them, they were in different groups. So some of them were doing healing, others were doing meditation, others were doing martial arts, surprisingly. And they were all practicing the different spiritual arts that are common to the human race. And I asked the guy, I was like, what is this? And he said, these are the astral bodies of humans that are asleep. And you're the only one that's going to remember this because you had an out-of-body experience and came here. And I was like they're not going to remember it. And he proceeded to explain, yes, that higher levels of sentience or higher levels of consciousness, they have to engage, or they do engage in a kind of evolutionary development program for lower levels of sentience, and that is done covertly. Because if they were to do it more overtly, it would interfere with the playing out of destiny or
Free will.
of, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they have to work in this way behind the scenes on people while they're sleeping, so that it doesn't interfere so overtly with their lives. So what I saw directly was that the gifts that people awaken to at some point in their physical life are things that they've been trained in and that they've practiced on higher planes for years sometimes. So that means your guides or your higher parts of you, they've been training you for years in advance before the awakening or before the gift that you begin to embody and live even manifests. So I saw that very clearly, and then I asked, how large is this? Are these kinds of operations? And I said, how many facilities like this are there? And he's like, I can't even give you a number because there's so many groups that are involved in this kind of consciousness development, and they were only one of them. So.
This is amazing. right? Because when one goes through the awakening, it's like that the triggering of remembering where it all feels so natural, and it feels like you've always known this information, or you've always had this skill set. You just never put it to use. And that's
Yeah. The phrase we always say is, I feel like I've done this before.
right.
Right? No, literally, you've done it before. Like, not even, we don't even have to go into a past
This
life. I mean, just in
explains
this.
so much. This explains so much. And this is very pertinent information for all of the listeners.
But now that I've said it, right, or if you read a book where this particular idea is introduced, you can stumble upon it very quickly. Right. So later, I read the Journeys trilogy by Robert Monroe, super late in the game. I mean, most people who get into OBEs, they read Robert Monroe like within the first 3 years or something, because he's really one of the pioneers in the field. But like for whatever reason, I just never read his stuff. And when I started having OBEs like this, Robert Monroe describes the exact same kind of OBEs in his book Far Journeys. In his second book, he starts to have these types of experiences. Yeah, he comes to the same conclusion. Like, and the entities literally tell him, this is just what happens to human consciousness. Like, the development has to happen in sleep in certain areas.
That's so compelling. So compelling. Holy crap.
Yeah. So everyone has guides. Everyone has a higher self. And this gets into the topic or what I stumbled into even after this. So we have everyone's familiar with guidance, right? Like, we all know what guidance is. We have this sense that we're being pulled or directed in a particular area or down a particular path, and it's like this invisible hand behind our back. And if we really look at our awakening and some of the really important moments in our life, we'll find that there was something outside of our conscious mind that was supporting us, that was guiding us in a particular direction. Some people describe this as a voice, right? Or when people do tarot or other kinds of divination, they receive the images from this guidance, clairvoyantly. They receive it in their mind's eye, or they actually see it visibly if they're that kind of clairvoyant. So I had a similar understanding. Like, at some point with all these OBEs, I began to wonder what is guiding this state. Like, I've had so many, but what is actually shifting me from one world to another, or what is it that's behind this whole unfolding in the out-of-body experience? And you would think that I would ask that question earlier, but I never did. So when it comes to guidance and that voice of intuition that we hear, that voice of the higher self, we just take it for granted. We're like, oh, that's the higher self. Or like the silver cord. What does the silver cord even attach to? Right? We just say it's your silver cord. It's attached to your physical body. But if you go further, the silver cord's attached to another structure. So, but we rarely actually ask that question. What is it? What is this voice that is speaking to me? Like, what is this intelligence that is guiding me? We could say higher self, but what is that? So I began to wonder, what is it? Right? And so that led to I would say, a seismic change or leap, a quantum leap in my out-of-body experiences, because now I was looking at the nature of the state itself as opposed to the different things I was learning in those experiences. I was trying to get behind the veil now. So I had an OBE one night, and I said higher self now. This is a command that you can use as soon as you get out of body. You can say higher self now. But when I said higher self now, I had the intention of this, like, turning back and seeing what it actually is. I've experienced the higher self before as like a formless cosmic mind. It was very much like Father God type of experience that Christian mystics describe. It's like this light in the clouds, and it speaks, and you die in bliss. I had that when I first started having OBEs. But I never had access to that experience again. So anytime I try higher self now, it lead me to something, but it wouldn't lead me to that particular source.
Interesting.
So now it's many years later, and I say higher self now again, and I appear in, yeah, I can only describe it as being inside of a computer mainframe, or inside of some kind of, it's like being inside a spaceship, but there were no windows, and you weren't in space as we normally refer to it as. You're in some kind of inner reality. So the Bible says, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. So the question is, what is the house and what are the rooms? When Edgar Casey would get his psychic information for his clients, and also about the previous Earth cycles like Atlantis and all this, he would go into a garden in an OBE, and an old man would open the book of life. And from the images of the book of life, he would be transported to these other realities. So I think my theory, I could be wrong here, my theory is that these levels of OBE, or these different levels of consciousness, are more like information fields. And they appear differently to each person depending on their cultural background and what is previously existing in their memory. So I don't know if Edgar Casey or someone who lived 300 years ago would appear inside a computer mainframe, because computers didn't exist at that time. Instead, they appeared in a garden, and an old man with a book had the answers, right? But what I appeared in was inside a computer mainframe. And yeah, in the mainframe, there was this invisible, there was a being there, I just couldn't perceive it. And there was a screen, like a hologram screen. And I've had many lucid dreams and OBEs where this screen shows up and it gives me a lesson at the end of a kind of challenge or training that I'm being put through. But this wasn't a training this time. So I'm before this hologram screen, and it's like it starts doing this biometric scan on me, and it says, or it's communicating to me telepathically. And it's like, it just says, incarnate is alarmed. Incarnate is alarmed. And I was definitely alarmed. I was,
What is
I was
happening?
like,
Yeah,
I was like, what the fuck is this? This cannot be happening. No way. And I remembered, of course, the command that I used. I said higher self now. So I know this wasn't this wasn't a dream. There's clearly some inner structure, inner reality, and I couldn't accept what I was experiencing. So I just freaked out, and I woke up
yeah.
back in my body. So that was my first contact with the mainframe, at least very directly like that. And there were a few other OBEs where I was brought back to, this inner structure. And the house is a reference to this particular level of consciousness. It's outside of time. And the rooms are referring to the different inner dimensions that are accessible from this particular higher self mainframe. One of these rooms I had a direct OBE to in June on a meditation retreat. And this was a different kind of OBE as well, because I was really powered up from all of the meditation. So I did a 10-day retreat last June, and it was in Buddhist meditation. So there's a specific state in Buddhism called cessation. So your mind gets so quiet and so still that it vanishes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the experiential field, the real of consciousness, this thing snaps. There's a complete absence of experience. It's not even a void. So a void is still an experience. Nothingness is still an experience. This is like no experience. So it's basically like falling asleep, except that when this cessation happens and consciousness vanishes, what occurs next is that the experiential field turns back on. So you actually see mind, body, consciousness regenerate itself out of nothing. And in that regeneration period, the faculties of consciousness of like shifting attention or generating intentions are not available yet. So it's a kind of truly seeing behind the veil. There's no, you're not able to do anything in that state. Anyways, so one of the effects of cessation and these deeper meditation states is that it literally, it's like your energetic body becomes a freaking firework. Your chakras and all of your channels and all of this stuff, they become flooded with light, and you get very, very powerful. So on day 5, I had a kind of OBE that I've never experienced before. I'd never heard of it. Usually when you have a bilocation type OBE, which means your consciousness transfers from one place to another. So like, let's say you've had a previous lucid dream or an OBE, and as you're falling asleep, you keep your attention on that place. And if you hold your consciousness there for long enough and begin to feel yourself in that reality, you can actually enter that reality. So your consciousness will disappear from here and it'll appear over there. But there's still this like disappearing that happens, and then you reappear in that place. This kind of OBE was different in the sense that I had done this meditation that lasted like 10 hours. I couldn't sleep, so I just laid down and didn't move the whole night. Just kept meditating while laying there. And all that happened is like too much to get into, but I'll just focus on like OBE part. But at the end of the night, towards the morning, the consciousness was so powered up that I was just able to close my eyes, and the black screen of the mind's eye, became the next reality, became the OBE. So there was no separation of the astral body. There was no vibrational state. There was no reappearance and disappearance of consciousness like in bilocation. Nope. This was streamlined. You close your eyes and you're there. It just appears. So I appeared in this room in the mainframe, and there were screens everywhere. Screens of first person point of view of other lives. So the screen would be of whatever that other person or that other life personality was doing. And when I shifted my attention to one of the screens, as my attention is shifting into one of the screens, I remember specifically having the thought, this is so real. If I go into this, will I disappear from this reality completely? It was a real question, because I never had an OBE that was like that level of clarity. It was more real than the waking state. So I just went along with it. And I appeared in this woman's body, and I was looking through her eyes, and it felt like the 1970s, and she was just standing on her back porch watching the autumn leaves fall. And yeah, I remember the chairs and the table, and she turned around inside of the house, zoomed out, boom, plopped into another body, into another scene, zoomed out again into another scene, zoomed out again into another scene, again and again and again. And then finally, I'm like reappearing in my physical body at the meditation retreat. And for a few seconds, like every split second that passed, my face and my body would change. So it would feel like one moment I was a woman, the next a man, the next some other non-human being, like this.
These were all your incarnations?
I don't know. I assume that they were. I'm not sure. There's no sign that says these are your incarnations.
Right. It could be someone else's.
Possibly, but most likely it was mine, because the mainframe was the same.
Right.
So the higher self mainframe, that inner structure was the same. It was just a room in the structure. And later it was told to me that those were my other lives. But later it was revealed that the higher self is a level of dreaming. So our life here is also like a level of dreaming. So in the same way that you're in your dreams, your dream bodies, yourself as a dream character is not aware that you're actually sleeping in a bed during that time that the dreaming is occurring. If it is aware, that's a lucid dream, which is different. But every night when you dream and it's non-lucid, your dreaming life has no idea about your physical life here. Yet it's active and you're involved in different situations and whatever is happening in the dreamscape, right? In the same way, we at the physical level, unless we've awakened to it, are not aware of the level of consciousness that is operating as the higher self, unless we have direct contact with it. So what I discovered was that the higher self is this spectrum of planes of consciousness. It refers to, in Buddhism, it's called the realm or the realms of infinite space. There are many planes in Buddhism, right? So this is commonly referred to also as cosmic consciousness. Like at a level of your being, you are a cosmic consciousness, a higher self that is without form. But there's a level that is, quote, right below that, that is form. That's the structure I'm describing. So what I found in the mainframe was that all of the silver cords of the various life personalities or various incarnations are uploaded. They're plugged into this higher self mainframe, and there's information passing down and passing up, passing down to you and going up into the mainframe. But at that level in the mainframe, you're outside of time. So down here, it feels like these are your past lives. But from that level, all of your lives are occurring simultaneously.
So,
So that's how you're able to enter them, or how you're able to appear in the body of another incarnation,
Right.
is because from that plane, all of these lives are still
Happening.
happening. Exactly.
So,
It's only in the Earth learning
right.
system that time you experience it exists. Outside of that, it's a completely different. It's just totally different.
So knowing this, no, I mean, the spiritual concept and the spiritual truth is all time is happening now. But knowing this with your information that you just said, you can affect all of your lives if you know how to do it correctly.
What I found is that this was one of the things that was shown to me. That life of the woman from the 70s. She was in a very her marriage wasn't going well, and so the thing that was the challenge that she was being faced with was leaving the husband and taking the kid. And so I was transported to that period of her life where she was trying to do this, and like every time she would try to walk out that door, she couldn't until she was able to. And the moment she took the kid and walked out the door, like for real, there was this energy that shot up the silver cord and was loaded into the higher self mainframe and reached all the other parts of her,
Right.
all the other parts in the cluster, in your particular cluster. So what you're doing, the various challenges and the awakening that you're going through now, it's awakening and affecting other parts of you that you don't even know about, other lives that you haven't had contact with yet. And I've seen this very directly. There was a life I was taken to of a version of me that was a shaman. And I'll make it brief, but basically this was a kind of Mayan or Aztec reality. And he was a psychopomp. So that's a term for someone who guides the dead. Like that's his job as a shaman. He wasn't a healer. He was a person who guides the dead. And he existed in this like hierarchical superstructure with the priesthood. But like his role was down here as like a guy who does the death ceremonies and he helps people cross over. He wasn't like a high priest. So he couldn't make, executive decisions or anything like that. In this culture, it was an honor to be sacrificed. Like if you were chosen to be sacrificed, that was a very good thing. But the sacrifices were based on, pleasing the gods or supplicating the gods so that, there would be rain crops or whatever it was that the priesthood was telling people. And as an explorer himself, he was able to see that, you know, their whole map of reality and their whole like levels of heaven and all the things that they believed were bullshit. Like they were nonsense. But he couldn't say anything about it. So, you know, but this is what he discovered after like 20 years of doing this, you know, soul retrieval and psychopomp work, was that like their whole thing was nonsense. Like the sacrifices did absolutely nothing. If anything, they just fed these demonic forces, but definitely they did nothing. There was nothing, no relationship between that and what they proposed the sacrifices were doing. So one day his mother comes to him and his mother tells him, "Son, I'm so honored. I've been chosen as a sacrifice." And I remember like being him, and like his heart just shattered in that moment that his mom was going to die. And he had to like hold, you know, he had to like pretend with her that it was a good thing and that he was happy. But in his journeys in the afterlife, he knew that, you know, she was being killed for nothing. And so, you know, they proceeded with the sacrifice, and for whatever reason in this case, yeah, they proceeded with the sacrifice, and he was just so heartbroken that he went into the mountains and just meditated for something like 20 years.
Wow.
And during his time in meditation and doing his shamanistic work out there in solitude, he encountered one of these higher self beings. It appeared to him physically, and it showed him this whole higher self structure. It showed him the life personalities matrix that he exists in other lives. It showed him my life here at this time. And it just totally expanded his view of consciousness. He saw that people are trapped in this cycle between the so-called heavenly realms of that culture and the earth plane, and they just keep going back and forth, when actually this higher self vantage point, this like overview level of consciousness, is only accessible in going beyond these, what Robert Monroe calls the belief systems territories. So this guy has contact with, you know, his version, or he has contact with the mainframe, or the beings that are operating the mainframe, guiding the various incarnates that are in the cluster.
Right.
And he gets taken, or I mean, time passes and he decides it's time to go back to the village. And he goes back to the village, and now it's been like 25 years or something like that. And people still remember him, and he begins to do his services again, and he starts helping people. But now he has really, really incredible powers from having been in solitude for so long. And at some point he decides, you know, well, I don't have much time left anymore, and these people still believe all this nonsense. I should probably say something about it. So, and the guides, like the guides from the mainframe or from the higher self, they the main one like pleaded with him, was like, "Don't do this. Like they're gonna kill you, please."
Did you say that these beings are your guides in the mainframe? Or they're managing this mainframe, correct?
Yeah, you have two levels of guides, in my opinion. One are the spirit guides that are your other life personalities that are helping you. At some point, you find out that your guides are actually you.
Wow.
Like you're not.
Right.
Yeah. So the guides are your other lives that are able to bridge that gap across time. That's one level of guides. The other level is the level that functions at this higher self level, which means that they have access to all of the other yous in your cluster, and that they're managing that from a specific, at least I experienced it as they manage it from like the core of the mainframe. They basically sit around a table, and they're like at a very omniscient level of consciousness. So they're able to bob and weave through these other lives and help you in certain areas and really guide you. So yeah, that's the only differentiation, because some of your guides will not know about this particular higher self structure that I'm describing, but the quote unquote graduates of the Earth learning system, they are aware of it, or they're operating from it. So Yeah, so this shaman decides, with the advice from he decides to go against the advice of his guide, of his teacher from the higher self mainframe, and he just goes and he just tells people the whole thing's a load of nonsense. This like the heavens are not eternal. Like
Right.
the stories about the previous Earth cycles are wrong. Like there's this
It's like a
thing
devout Catholic
outside.
going into a church and saying this is all bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all bullshit. My mother died. That was the main thing. That was the main thing. Like he never let go of that. That his mom, his mom that he loved so much died for nothing. And so that was his charge to go against the shaman priests.
Wow.
And yeah, they burned him for it. So he's being burned alive. And this was a very powerful moment and vision. As he was being burned alive, he ascended into the higher self. And as he was doing that, this energy exploded from his heart chakra. And I saw it just blast through all the people that were watching, that knew him and that loved him. And the energy went up their silver cords and affected the other parts of them. So in Hindu terms, or in yoga terms, they call that Maha Samadhi, or like the great Samadhi, or the great cessation. And that's the energetic effect it has. It's like a very profound heart transmission. So all those people were crying, of course, but it did something to other parts of them.
In all
And I
aspects of
think,
them
and
as well.
yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And so this is what's happening through all of our interactions with the people that we know and love. The information is going up and down. It's going to other parts of ourselves, and then other parts of ourselves are communicating with us all the time.
Happening right
So
now
that's
during this podcast to our other aspects and selves. And that you just, this whole conversation reinforces that the concept in philosophy of every action, every reaction affects all parts of you in all universes, galaxies, lifetimes, dimensions, and time streams.
Yep.
It's all connected. And once you get that bird's eye view, that scope of how it all works and how it all plays out, it really puts everything into perspective. Wow. Such a powerful conversation. Such a powerful conversation. I'm speechless.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Like you would think that after having this guidance thing speak to you your whole life, that at some point you'd wonder, like, well, what is it that's speaking to me? You have to get to a certain point in your unfolding to ask that question, or you hear from someone else and it sparks a curiosity, and then you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I do want to see what this hidden hand is. What is it? Yeah, and this is the final part of the whole mainframe saga. It's I'll tell it to you. It's pretty brief. I was having a dream, and in the dream I was calling an old boss, and this phone call intercepted my call in the dream. Dude, I didn't even know this was possible. I never even heard of this before. The dreamscape split into two realities. So now you're having two dreams simultaneously. In one dream, you're not lucid at all, which is me on the phone in the dreamscape, right?
Right.
In the other reality, imagine you're sitting around a table with 8 or so other very advanced consciousnesses, and somehow you're both at the same time. You're on both ends of you're the receiver, but you're also the transmitter. So in the reality where you're transmitting a message, you're sitting around this table, and you tell you in the dream this: if you do not live your life according to the plan that you/we decided upon, your life will be full of misery and suffering. If you do live according to what you/we decided upon, your life will be full of joy and your life will be full of happiness and joy.
Right.
Suffering is by design to move you back to the original plan.
It's an indicator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We love you. We're always here for you. Goodbye. Click. that whole other reality disappears and you're back in the dreamscape. So you actually exist at these levels already. That's the part. You already exist in the higher self mainframe, and you also already exist as those cosmic levels, those formless levels. So like Helen, the experience that you had on DMT, it's not that your mind like creates that formlessness, you know, and then you go there. What happens is that you have a spectrum of planes that are all you, and you just went from the human you to the void you.
Great.
That's all that
I'm
happened.
straight there. Like,
Yeah, you just phase. You phase from one level to another. So that's really what's happening when you experience, like when I had that experience in the mainframe and I was there, I wasn't there as Ryan. I was there as one of the beings around the table.
and we can get all this information through our, I mean, this is basically all intuitive information, right? We get this in the form of intuition.
Yeah, intuition, learning how to distinguish between the voice of your conscious mind and the voice of your higher self, like that's a whole thing in of itself. But that's really the whole essence of channeling and psychic communication with these levels. So yeah, but it's always speaking. The data streams the data stream is always accessible. It's just a matter of where your attention is. So if you just meditate and you tune into it, you'll begin to receive messages and images. You can just say higher self now and see what happens. Whether you're in meditation or whether you're in an out of body experience, you just say higher self now.
I think what's powerful about what you're sharing, Ryan, is that like it's a very concrete, easy way to understand quantum entanglement, right? Because when people hear those words and it's like, what are you talking about, quantum entanglement? But you really broken it down for us in a way that, you know, includes the dreamscapes or astral projections or any OBEs, and it's just really cool to hear people. I think it's going to be really cool for our listeners to be able to get that if they haven't been introduced to that themselves.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I call that the what is it? The configuration model of consciousness. So every level of consciousness is like a dream. It's a configuration. This is the human configuration. Right now, this room is consciousness is appearing as this room. In your void experience, consciousness was appearing as the void. In the mainframe, consciousness was appearing as me with this group collective mind, and so on and so forth. There's many levels and configurations. So
I'm also thinking about the cascade and snowball effect of healing, how
yeah,
one person can trigger healing for millions and all aspects of those millions in other lifetimes.
yep,
How
absolutely,
that can be felt and create a ripple in time and space. What
absolutely. That's
power that is.
healing and the awakening is so paramount. Like we often hear, you know, you're here to learn lessons, right? But why? So what I saw was that you're here to learn lessons because there's this superstructure that we call the higher self and all of these other incarnates, and a large percentage of the incarnates are not
Right.
aware. They're
Right.
not aware of any of this
Mhm.
at all. They're just like trapped in the belief
Right.
systems territories. So
For the listeners out there who haven't had an OBE, Ryan, what do you suggest their first steps they should take to adventure and explore the out of body experience?
lucid dreaming is the most accessible and easy way to get started. Stephen LaBerge wrote a really known book on lucid dreaming. Just lucid dreaming in general, exploring that and beginning to have lucid dreams. It's really the gateway or the entry, because until you have a lucid dream, your entire orientation is physical. Like you probably haven't had an experience in the non-physical yet, besides your dreams, that your normal dreams. But if you haven't gone into that with lucidity, then you just experience them as memories once you've woken up. But once you're able to enter a dream and be lucid in it, now you're actually in non-physical consciousness. You are in a non-physical body. You're in the dreamscape. And the way that OBEs and lucid dreams are remembered is the same. So like you remember an OBE upon awakening in the physical body. So if you don't remember the OBE, it's as if it didn't happen. It's the same with lucid dreaming. You could have a very, very long lucid dream, but if for whatever reason you don't remember it, you'll wake up as if it didn't happen. And then, something later that day triggers your dream memory. And then you literally remember on the spot, oh, I had this whole lucid dream thing that was going on. It's the same with OBEs. Like you could be having OBEs right now. I mean, you are having them, but unless you remember them, it's as if they're not happening.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the now what part of the episode. Ryan, you are starting your journey as a monk soon.
Yeah.
Is there any last pieces of advice for the listeners within OBEs or outside of OBEs? What would you like to tell our listeners as you head off into your journey to become a monk for the second time?
Just go and do it. If everything I told you today was profound, or you feel particularly inspired by it, just begin to explore lucid dreaming and out-of-body experience and get in direct contact with the higher self. That's the thing that I recommend the most. Whatever path you want to take to that, whether it's channeling or tarot or lucid dreaming or OBE, it's part of your requirement in this incarnation to discover more of what you are, especially at these higher levels.
Ryan, it's always so fascinating talking to you. You always have the best stories. Send us your your address or your location when you're in Thailand, and whenever you're back, we'd love to have you on again. That was such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, you too.
Yeah, thank you.
If you like this episode, please subscribe. I'm your host, JR.
And I'm your host, Helen. Until next time, everyone.